Fans, David Alan Carmichael, Preservative Talk Radio, but you are engaging right now in Preservative Talk Video, and I'm just kind of setting up. I'll be going to be producing a radio show right now, and in a moment I'm going to push play on my background music, and I'm going to get quiet during that time, and then I'm going to just start shooting from a hip on a radio broadcast. Here we go. Fellow Freedom fans, David Alan Carmichael, Preservative Talk Radio, for the Nooga-Radio Network in the Shangri-La of Liberty. This little valley nestled among the mesas, Chattanooga, Tennessee, northwestern Georgia, and northeastern Alabama. Yes, so welcome to this Preservative Talk Radio. Welcome back to Preservative Talk Radio. Thinking about our last broadcast segment, and I had Herb Titus playing. And by the way, I had Herb Titus playing. Some of you think, I think it's important content, but actually what I'm dealing with right now is bronchial stuff. So when you spend 45 minutes talking and exercising your voice when you've got bronchitis beating you up, I know that let's see what happens in the next, over the next several minutes to see if my voice stays in there. So you're going to be able to watch it happen. Hopefully you will not be watching my voice morph over the next several minutes. But what I want to do in the next period of time that we have available, I'm going to play off of a little bit of what we talked about just in the last segment about engaging in litigation against the United States, because as many of you know, I've got it going on right now. And there's things I'll be typing over the next couple of months. And I want to be going back to this issue of what is our responsibility and what is it that we need to know in the very near term to equip ourselves to protect our own liberty and the liberty of our grandchildren. And I don't mean just posterity in the future. I'm talking right now. Our children, our grandchildren, practically, because of the weird things that we individually are going to face. We're going to talk about that also. And then also, I noticed that the Fox News people have some kind of litigation thing going on. They're paying lots of money. People are dropping out of their lineup. And the accusation is they said something that they knew wasn't true and all that kind of stuff. Well, I'm going to be a little bit scary today. And I'm going to exercise the First Amendment. I'm going to render my opinion, and I may or may not mention somebody's name. And I'm going to be talking about my reflections on things that somebody else had said. Famous people. I'll be reflecting on things that famous people are doing in public. I'm going to be naming names. And I'm going to be rendering my opinion. And I'm going to be reading definitions in law to counter what I think is a misunderstanding on one very famous person's part and a dysfunction on another very famous person's part. One is a well-known nationally known broadcaster. Another one is a president of the United States. I want you to stick with me. As we went into our last conversation, or my last monologue, where I was sharing the comments from Herb Titus regarding our litigation many years ago, that Brother Herb, I call him Brother Herb. Most people say Mr. Titus or Dr. Titus. Again, he passed away Father's Day 2021. Very precious man, very precious to me and my family, because when we looked like scoundrels, because of me, my entire family was sort of looked upon by the church, by society. I became infamous when people found out that I had, in the midst of my naval career, 17 years into it, that I came to a place where I had the audacity to request a religious accommodation. Suddenly I became infamous. Herb Titus mentioned that while he was working on my case, he was also working on the case of Michael New, an amazing, godly patriot who got a bad conduct discharge or something like that from the Army when they told him to man up in fatigues that had United Nations symbology on it. And he said, if you can show me in the Constitution, the law, or the regulation where your order is lawful, then I will obey it. But as I see it, your order contradicts the Constitution, the laws of the United States written by Congress, the Army uniform regulations, and nowhere in any of those things does it give you justification for ordering me to wear a United Nations emblem on my United States Army service uniform. Now, most people didn't know the details of that. His officer, when he had that conversation, says, listen, it looks good, put it on. And because he had given an oath to the Constitution of the United States, before Almighty God, so help me God, he couldn't do it. He would have loved to obey the order, but it would have had to been shown constitutionally, according to United States law, in keeping with the United States uniform regulations. What was his oath? His oath was, I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic. Sometimes a foreign enemy happens to be an officer appointed over you. But he said that he would obey true faith, or he would have true faith and allegiance to the same, that he would obey the orders of the President of the United States and the orders of the officers appointed over me. You say an officer appointed over him gave him an order. The President of the United States may have given an order. However, there's a comma there because it says, I will obey those orders of the President of the United States and the officers appointed over me according to uniform code. According to regulation and the Uniform Code of Military Justice, so help me God. So he appealed to his oath and explained to the officers that I would love to obey your order so I could keep my oath. However, your order, whether it's yours, Lieutenant, or the President of the United States, the Commander-in-Chief orders, if it does not comply with the regulations that are subjected to the Constitution, the legislation, and the edicts of the Secretary of the Army in his case, unless you can fulfill those prongs, I cannot, because of my oath, I cannot obey your order. That was Michael New's case going on when my case was going on. And so one of the things that Herb Titus pointed out was that my approach to everything, and he said, we start thinking about the First Amendment, Second Amendment, all this kind of stuff when we have a conflict. He said, but what we need to do is go back to Article 1, Article 2, Article 3. So we're in an Article 3 court, but we had to deal with Article 1 and Article 2 before we got there. Article 1, legislation. What are the powers of Congress? What has Congress said? And if Congress has not said something in accordance with the Constitution, Congress has not said something. It's void if it doesn't subject itself to the test of the Constitution. And then we go to the Article 2. What are the executive officer, the President of the United States, and those who work for him, what are the things that they've done? That the regulations are those things of the Article 2 of the U.S. Constitution. What are the President's orders and what are the regulations of the Article 2 section of government, branch of government? And if all those things are met, then I'm free. And if their organization, their regulations apply to me, I'm then free to obey them, to apply them, to enforce them. And I can do it as an act of worship. I'm worshiping Almighty God when his ministers give me something to do, because when I do it, I'm ultimately loving my neighbor as myself. That is the perspective that I had when I gave my oaths. Several times I had given my oath when I was in the Navy. And I did it with joy. I did it with a high standard of accountability, so that when it came down to the point where I had a conflict with a Navy regulation and I needed an accommodation, it turned out there's a regulation for accommodation. So my behavior, my conduct did not violate the regulations. In fact, when I went to obey the regulation regarding communicating with the commanding officer, and it turns out in regard to requests for religious accommodation, I had not read it, but I was actually obeying it. Now, we found out in our litigation that Herb didn't talk about. One of the things in the regulation for religious accommodation, it turns out there was a mandate for every naval command to tell every single military person about this accommodation for religion regulation. And when somebody was informed about that regulation, there was supposed to be what we called a page 13 entry, administrative remarks, put in their service record where the person signed acknowledging that they'd been told about the religious accommodation instruction. Guess what they never, ever, ever did? They never did that because nobody was obeying it when I went to request it, and I wasn't given the access to it to use it as my model for my request for accommodation. However, because I've read the Bible, because I've read the regulations, because I know how to communicate and submit myself to the lawful authority and the command structure, it turns out my little exercise in actually filling out the request for religious accommodation was 100%. It was Johnny on the spot. It was perfect. And what happened is those who may have given lip service to their oath, ended up violating the regulations, ultimately violating the law, and it injured me. And it didn't just injure me, it injured you. I was somebody who had committed myself to being excellent in my profession and being the best chief petty officer sonarman that I could be. In fact, taking the hit, setting aside my promotion when it came down to ethical things. There were times where I could actually have myself look better in the eyes of men if I would just comply to what I think is, what I now understand, is seditious speech. When I have my peers or my seniors asking me to do something that either doesn't obey the law, the Constitution, regulations, or even this, what if it doesn't fulfill what I know my commanding officer's mission goals are? What if it's that? Just comply with what the team wants right now, David, because if you report this sonar contact, we're not going to come into Norfolk on time, and it's going to mess up my weekend. That is not a hypothetical. That actually happened. So I was actually subjected to orders to not report what I identified as a Soviet submarine, ballistic missile submarine. So how's that? But in that instance, I gave my reports up the chain of command as far as I was allowed to do. And then at that point, and this is as a junior petty officer doing that. Those are the kind of things you face. So guess what? I wasn't in good favor with the senior chief petty officer when I communicated to his supervisor. I wasn't a friend, but my mission was to be the best sonarman for my neighbor that I could be, and put all that bazillion dollars of training and bazillions of dollars of equipment on the ship that was specifically there to detect and to classify something that was a potential threat to the United States. So I'm kind of giving you an anecdotal, this was my experience, because I'm trying to communicate a mindset. By what authority do we act? Is it according to fear? Is it according to trying to comply to our neighbor's immoral norm because we don't want immediate conflict? Or do we have a higher goal? And again, I do everything on a constitutional basis, biblical basis, the basis of right versus wrong. And the biblical basis is don't do everything as pleasing God, not as a man pleaser. So that's the kind of thing we're going to talk about. My goal here is to give you courage, to give you tools, to give you information about what you can do to fulfill your loving your neighbor as yourself, fulfilling your purpose. It's going to continue to preserve society. And also, you're going to see some serious victory when you begin to stand courageously to do that which is right. We're coming back. So that was ad hoc, shooting from the hip. Didn't know exactly what I was going to be doing there and what saying. So I'm going to take a little bit of break and contemplate what the next 15 minutes is going to look like. Fellow Freedom fans, David Alan Carmichael, Preservative Talk Radio for this Nooga-Radio Network, engaging the issues on a constitutional basis, a biblical basis, the basis of right versus wrong. I'm going to be bouncing and balancing the U.S. Constitution today against the Bible, and the reason why I'm naming names. Get ready for First Amendment opinion sharing. I'm going to give a plug, an advertisement for Sean Hannity. And I'm going to disagree with something that he said over and over and over again today. I have an opinion, and I'm going to base this on the Bible. The Bible says, evil men do not understand justice, but those who seek the Lord understand all. And I believe, this is my opinion, that those who seek the Lord understand all, that there is a proportional effect, that the deeper that you seek the Lord, and that would be the actual, the adjustment in the Bible is Lord. In the Hebrew, it was Yehovah, the one who was, who is, and who will be. That's who it was referring to. So in the Bible, it says, if I seek that one, then I'm going to proportionally understand justice. I'll understand all, which includes justice. But the more proportionally the evil is in my mind and my heart, the less likely I am to understand justice. Now, of course, in my spare time, I'd love to be absolutely seeking the Lord and reaping those benefits. Now, in the reality, in my practical life on earth, one of the things that I'm trying to do to understand justice is I read the Bible, I read the Constitution. That's what I do. That's like my method. That's my study method. And so that I contemplate right and wrong, and I have a reference. So I'm going to actually read, the reason I brought up Sean Hannity today is because he gave a comment that he believed, in so many words, I'm not quoting him, that the Republicans are messing up if they will not take a position that they would endorse the shedding of innocent blood so long as that innocent blood has a father that has committed rape and it manifested their birth, or if if somebody has committed incest, if their father has committed incest, that their innocent blood should be shed. That is essentially, in so many words, what I've heard Sean Hannity communicate. Now, I heard him communicate that recently, so I really got irritated. And I thought, what an evil statement. What an evil statement. The statement itself, in my opinion, is evil. I know in the Bible, I could be quoting it, it could say that God hates the shedding of innocent blood. But what I'm going to do today is I'm going to go to the U.S. Constitution and I'm going to go to the principle about whether or not a baby, man or woman in the womb, is responsible for the sins of the father, for the sins of the parents. And I'll be talking about historically where protections come in law historically for the unborn, for those who are in the womb, who are alive in the womb. So the third prong that Mr. Hannity talked about, where if it's to say, for the life of the mother, protecting the health of the mother. So I'm going to start there first. I'm going to let you know that if a woman is literally saving her own life, the standard for holding her accountable for the capital crime of the shedding of innocent blood, which is murder, the standard for proof is so high that in all likelihood, a woman would not be held liable or accountable to be able to, by a jury of men and women, to be able to be subject to the standard of that capital crime for proof, because it has to be proven beyond a reasonable doubt that she was not in threat of her own life. Now, convenience is not threat of life, but let's just say it's hard to prove that a woman is not in fear of her life, because it's just unnatural to want to kill a baby within the womb. It's just unnatural. It goes contrary to the nature of things. So you don't need to write a statute that says, oh, a woman can kill her baby if her health is involved or whatever. You don't have to write a statute about that, because as far as it being a capital crime murder and to be proved, the standard is just so high it's not reachable. If you read the commentaries of Sir William Blackstone on this subject, he said they called it a misprision. A misprision, meaning it was not a misdemeanor. It was a hidden felony. It was one that you could not prove, a felony that was unprovable. And so when it appeared that a woman had committed an abortion, in utero infanticide, they punished it as a misdemeanor, because, let's admit it, notwithstanding they're punishing you as a crime, as a misdemeanor, that their real standard of proof of, beyond a reasonable doubt gets thrown out the window. Let's admit it. So back in old England, that's the way it was. And so the way they would encourage women to not commit in utero infanticide is they treated it as a misdemeanor. It was easier to prosecute. But you don't have to write a law. So, can we let you shed innocent blood if you are stressed about your health? You don't have to write a statute on that. So that's not understanding justice. And that's not understanding the principles of law and how justice, the system of justice, works. So now let's talk about shedding innocent blood in utero infanticide in punishment for the sins of the father. So I'm going to go to the U.S. Constitution. That's what I'm going to do. I'm going to go to the U.S. Constitution. Right now is the Constitution of the United States. And I'm going to skip past we the people. I'm going to skip past the Article 1, Section 1, Section 2, Section 3. We're going to go to Section 3, I believe it is. Here we go. Times. Oh, I should have had this down. In punishments for treason. So let me do the Control F treason, because I've got stage fright right now and my brain is dead. So, treason. Here it is. They shall in all cases there's treason. I'm going to find it again. Treason. Let me just start explaining and then we'll quote it. But there's this thing called corruption of blood. Here it is. Okay, that's treason. Okay, Section 3. Article 3, Section 3. It says, treason against the United States shall consist only in levying war against them or in adhering to their enemies, giving them aid and comfort. And so treason is, we're going to talk about a punishment for treason. So no person shall be convicted of treason unless on the testimony of two witnesses to the same overt act or in confession in open court. Treason is a capital crime. It's not a crime of nature against nature, such as murder or in utero infanticide. This is a capital crime that's manufactured as a subject to somebody being subject to the laws of our society. The next paragraph says, the Congress shall have power to declare the punishment of treason, but no attainder of treason shall work corruption of blood or forfeiture except during the life of the person attainted. Now, what this is treason is a capital crime, and what's the penalty of treason? Let's say if you're not put to death. Well, you're not going to be voting. There's a whole bunch of civil rights that you don't have. But you know what it doesn't affect if you get before two or more witnesses in open court and found to be somebody who's committed treason, your son or daughter doesn't go to jail under this principle of corruption of blood. Your son or daughter doesn't lose their voting rights. Your son or daughter doesn't lose their right to inheritance. So that's a principle. It's called, there shall be no corruption of blood. Now, how does this deal or relate to in utero infanticide? Mr. Sean Hannity would say, if you can commit in utero infanticide, you could have the punishment of somebody's rape without any two or more witnesses accusing the infant in the womb. You can have them put to death because of the sins of their father. That's what Mr. Hannity's, I don't know that anybody's given him a call in if the call screener allowed this conversation. So whether or not, in his belief that the Republicans, if they stick to the ideal of the purpose of government to protect life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, if they stick to that ideal in their political persuasion, that Sean Hannity's opinion, as in so many words, was that they're going to lose power. And he didn't think it was advisable for the Republicans to be so dogmatic on that issue. And I say, Mr. Hannity, I would love you to consider what I have to say here. I'd love you to consider your opinions and subject them to a biblical basis, a constitutional basis, a biblical basis, and the basis of right versus wrong as an absolute. If the unborn have no rights, Mr. Hannity, you have no rights. If you're going to squander, if you're not going to protect those who are the weakest member of our society, then you have no protection for those of us who are much stronger. So as you almost the tone of voice, I wish I could be all like peaceful, mild-mannered, and gracious, but because this is such an important thing, and Mr. Hannity in particular has such an influence coast to coast and around the world to those who are tuning in from other countries, that I pray for Mr. Hannity, and we all need to pray for one another in this way, is that we would orient ourselves to that which is absolutely right, and that we would not swayed ourselves to doing those things that are not right because of pragmatic considerations. That we would, the way I've come to this conclusion, I didn't come to these conclusions by reading the Bible. I literally came to these conclusions by first seeking the Lord. Evil men do not understand justice, but those who seek the Lord understand all. I believe it's proportional to the effort or the status that on the scale, on the scale in either way. I believe that there's a proportional fruit of understanding justice, proportional to those efforts we put into seeking the Lord. So my call to Mr. Hannity and those who he persuades and those who can persuade him, that you would go back to a standard that is higher than pragmatism. I'm going to go real quick. I'm going to go to the Bible because there's an actual verse in the Bible, Ezekiel. It's Ezekiel chapter 18, and there's a discussion. Yet you say, why should the son not bear the guilt of the father? And it goes on to say, the soul who sins shall die. The son shall not bear the guilt of the father, nor the father bear the guilt of the son. The righteousness of the righteous shall be upon himself, and the wickedness of the wicked shall be upon himself. So let's not make little babies who are so innocent and are so desperate for our protection. They're so vulnerable. And we're so powerful in relation to them. Let's not subject them to become codependent or victims of the sins of their fathers, who by aggravated assault, sexual battery, whether it's somebody they're related to or not, who they commit sin against a woman, that the children should not be and bear the sins of the father and become victims because of the hearts of those who would be willing to shed innocent blood. That's my appeal today, David Alan Carmichael, Preservative Talk Radio. That's my opinion. And I don't know the hearts of other people, but my admonition is that we would stop and consider where our heart is and purify it the best we can. So that was stark. That was tough. And I'm going to take another break and consider what's going to be coming in the next 15 minutes. Fellow Freedom fans, David Alan Carmichael. Preservative Talk Radio, my voice is hanging in here, notwithstanding these bronchial attacks. I got the bronchonk going on here. So I've got to take this entire segment and not cough. because you'll hear the bronc honk. When I went this next idea, there's a couple of things I was thinking about. Of course, you heard me discuss what I heard from Sean Hannity about his perspective on whether whether the Republicans should not be so dogmatic about upholding law against abortion. The shedding of innocent blood is unlawful as a matter of nature. We understand that. And it doesn't, in fact, sad but true, if you have, by whatever reason, a life within you, you have a natural duty to protect it. It just is. It's inconvenient. Bless your heart. Call for help. Also, those of us, when somebody calls for help, we need to step up. So and again, fortunately, there's certain things I call for us to do. You don't want to be so much the hypocrite that you're going to do something and not willing to help somebody else. Now, I've got to be careful in the future to make sure that we're keeping with the same standard that I would call on the radio, that I would expect myself to be the standard that I should fulfill while I call others to do it. In the past, we've had opportunity to minister to people in challenging situations. God has given us the wherewithal and the logistic situation to take care of some of those things. I've recently been doing intervention for people as a part of our ministry. It's just what we do. Fortunately, because of a lawsuit against the United States, I have a certain amount of funding every month that allow me to do those kind of things, notwithstanding I'm not getting paid for it. So we've been blessed in that way. Everybody's logistic situation is different. But let's stop, and even as the book of James, we're talking about this with a bunch of teenagers at church. It talks about, hey, how can you see somebody there? And you don't just say, hey, be warm and blessed. I hope it all works out for you. Bless your heart, without doing something. So every one of us are in a situation, depending on what it is that we can provide, to be contemplating what it is we can do. I will tell you, in the lives of my children, who are now adults, the youngest one is 24 years old, because we modeled these things, a picture paints 1,000 words. We didn't have to teach the sermon on it. We could do it, and they'd participate. So they've had drug addicts in the house, homeless people in the house, because thank God that we were given the logistics to provide it when it was needed. So that, again, not everybody has those logistics. Of course, a lot of people have a lot more money than we do. So I'm just encouraging our listener, we've got a lot of weird times ahead of us. And I've seen recently people's lives radically change. We're talking from doing insanely, caught up in some insanely evil things, to within days flipped completely. Having a heart to do that which was righteous. I mean, amazing. In other words, like everybody around them who are like all churchized, all of a sudden see somebody who's demonized turn to Godized, and their life is so eager to do that which is right. We're all standing back going, whoa, we need to get our act together. That person that just days ago, who is so involved in darkness, is so chasing the light, we need to get sucked up in their vortex. So we've had opportunity to see that stuff happen. Now, there's something that we all have seen if we've watched any videos, and that's this, I'm going to actually say a word, because I'm getting this out of like dictionary. And if taken to its worst case, it's a profane word, though we're going scientific here. We're going Latin here. It might be Greek. I don't know which one it is. But I'm using the word, it's an offensive thing to consider it, but the word pedophilia. And I'm going to read what this is, and then I'm going to say what we've all observed on national TV, and it's troubling. And this is from a very famous person, one who happens to be a president of the United States. And I'm not, so let me just say I'm concerned about what I've seen without knowing the depths of the soul. I'm going to talk about this issue. Pedophilia, a psychiatric disorder in which an adult or older adolescent experiences a primary or exclusive, now in this word it says sexual attraction to prepubescent children. Now what I can't judge from the outside is whether or not anybody, without seeing some act that is very clearly sexual, that I could, under this definition, can say that anybody has pedophilia, which is the word is philia. Philio is from it's Greek. Okay, it's a Greek word. I know it because philio means attraction or liking, being attracted to or liking something. Philadelphia, right? The city of brotherly love, of liking in brotherly, say, affections. So the actual textual term is one of liking children. There's nothing in the word that expressly says it has to be sexual. So in the greatest sense, we should have fond heart concern for children, absolutely. And we should respect, and I will tell you as a soccer coach and doing youth ministry for the last 35 plus years, I am very careful to be not affectionate to a child unless, of course, like 5-year-olds, like hugs. But I'm very careful in the way that is accomplished. So I'll get down on my knees, give them the shoulder hug, affirm them because they love firm affection. Natural affection is something that we need to give children. Now, what I've observed, sadly, and admittedly, the President of the United States came out and said he had to apologize for rendering affection that was inordinate. It was too close. It was space invading. And it's troubling to see, and it keeps coming back. And it's creeping me out. Now, I don't know what his internal adjustments are, but I've seen it. It's troubled me, just like these statements about shedding of innocent blood. And I think I need to, and I have been, praying for the President of the United States. Because the demonstration is a little bit weird, okay? Because what would a reasonable person, is like the Dalai Lama, in the recent case, I don't even want to repeat what happened. But when we see that kind of stuff going on, we all know the rational mind goes, yeah, that's out of balance. There's something not right there. If you don't have enough respect to a young person who's vulnerable, to not invade their space and give them affection, that is not due. You're not their father, you're not their mother, giving consoling affection where it is not due. So I say, so it's something that if I were in person, I would pull the man aside and reprove him and give him a model of conduct. So just keep your hands off these people. These younger people, keep your hands off them. Your let's just say your muscle memory of how you act physically is, in my opinion, something that is troubling and ought not to be accomplished. So now that's pretty weird. Okay, so I'm having to stay in this First Amendment concern, and would we throw anybody under the bus normally? Our problem is when things are happening from the highest level of the nation, the greatest seat of power, and then rendering affections to those who are vulnerable. In my opinion, I think it's something that is of concern. Now, not throwing the guy under the bus, but folks, you know what we've got to do? We got to pray for one another. And I want to tell you that it matters. It'll affect people. It will make a difference. So I've recently prayed for somebody who is clearly troubled by things that were evil and was consumed and unable to control themselves. And they just kept going back to speaking about and enjoying things that were incredibly evil. Then we began to pray for them. And I was committed to that. And it was, we're saying within, I don't know, maybe less than 48 hours, I saw a radical change in this person's life. And within 72 hours, the person came to me and said, Mr. David, how can I become a Christian? And I was able to share that with him. And the person's life has radically changed. I'm going to snap my fingers like that. I don't know how good it's showing up in the microphone. Like that. Radical change of personality. Radical. They were set free. So I've seen in my own life people radically changed. I've seen in my own life physical healings where a person's leg that was bent, twisted very badly on the left side, where their foot was more than an inch and a half higher. The bottom of their foot was an inch and a half higher than the right leg, where the bottom of their foot was just above the Achilles heel, or the ankle bone. Not the Achilles, but the ankle bone. And the next day, straight leg, even leg. Most amazing thing, I thought I believed that stuff until I saw it, and I realized how wanting my belief was. So we have to know that it isn't just us. It is not just our minds. It is just not our will, mind, will, and emotions that can pull off our salvation. I'm talking salvation meaning freedom in our country. The kind of lifestyle, the kind of life set that we need to prevail and to make sure that we're maintaining liberty for ourselves and our posterity. It's going to take more than just our rhetoric. It's going to take divine intervention. And again, constitutional basis, biblical basis of right versus wrong. Read the Bible. You see throughout the time when people the society would do well, and then they'd venture into the wrong lifestyle, and we'd have collapse. They'd come to their senses, repent. Here's that classic, religious word, repent. Turn around, go the right direction, and prosperity returns. We're at a critical juncture. We need to pray for the presidents of our United States. The current one, we need to pray for his moral fiber, and that he would have a sound mind and not a deluded mind. Because people can mock him all they want, and they say, well, he's getting called old. You know what we need at the head of state? A sound mind. So I'm committing right now in front of you, you're going to hold me accountable, to pray for Joe Biden, for his moral status, his mental status, his success in that he could have divine intervention that would turn his mind into that which is right. And you know what, when we see it, you're going to know it's a miracle. So why are we giving rhetoric about it? Let's have enough rhetoric to say, hey, I can see on video what's showing up in the news, that there's a problem. He's advancing in utero infanticide. He's advancing just insanity with regard to those things that are immoral. And we know evil men do not understand justice, but those who seek the Lord understand all. So there's a consequence, and it's going to be proportional to the evil, or proportional to the seeking the righteous thought process that comes from God Almighty on high. So this was a big sermonette today. Okay, you get what you got. And I guess I was pretty stirred in my heart to not necessarily just talk about going through the structure of the Constitution. We hit it a little bit. We talked about corruption of blood and what that was. And even in the Constitution, we don't punish the next generation for the sins of this generation. So that goes to the point of these conversations about restitution. So we have to stick with an objective test so that we can advance and establish justice objectively, not arbitrarily, and that we can do our best to make sure whatever justice happens on earth is legit. Ultimately, we're going to face justice in the end. So David Alan Carmichael, Preservative Talk Radio, going to come back to you again next week, engaging the issues on a constitutional basis, a biblical basis, basis right versus wrong, for Nooga-Radio Network. Thank you for being a partner. Thank you for considering what we've had to say here today. Consider what we've said. Do your best to pray. Love your neighbor as yourself, and we'll be back. Thank you, video audience. That was kind of a harsh reality today. And that's Preservative Talk Radio. I hope you've enjoyed it.